Good morning again, Gospel City. It's really good to see you. I think we have new people today, and I am really glad to see you. And also those who are, I was told to just move a little bit. Okay, for those who are watching on the YouTube. And today's passage is from Mark chapter 1, verse 40 to 45. And this coming 4 weeks, we would like to just go through snapshots of Mark, as just Pastor Joel mentioned, and just see the people, the story of people who met Jesus. And today is the first one. This is the story of a leper. And you know, while we are going through the season of COVID-19, what is your biggest struggle? What do you struggle the most in this season? I think there are many, but for me personally, the biggest struggle was like limited contact with people. Like I couldn't just meet people just freely. And even when I meet you guys here, I cannot just hug. And I cannot even shake my hands. So the limited contact of people, like limited fellowship, or even limited worship, that was, I think, one of the biggest struggle that I am having in this season. But if you think about it, like the COVID-19, the virus, is that really the biggest factor that really hinders our relationship with one another? Or is that really the biggest factor that really hinders our worship? I don't think so. Because if you think about it, there are other stuff too in our lives. There are actually internal factors that really hinders us from getting to know one another or love one another or having this community, the life of community. There is internal hindrances that stops us, like from worshiping God. Like, isn't it true? Like sometimes it comes in the form of weakness or brokenness, or sometimes it comes with the form of like uncontrolled emotions, or sometimes it comes with anger, or sometimes it comes with like sinful behaviors. But there are things in our lives that greatly hinders us from the intimate relationship with one another and from the intimate relationship with God. And today's story is this. And that is why we need to hear the story of the leper today. Because today's story is a story of man with unsolvable problem that limits and hinders him greatly, both socially and spiritually. And it is a story of a leper that meets Jesus and truly gets restored, like from the very problem that was cutting him off from the community and from the worship. And then this is a story about true restoration. Sorry, this is too low, but it's okay. Okay, thank you. So this is a story about true restoration. And this true restoration always comes with the vulnerability before God. It always happens. It always starts when you come to God as you are. And when we bring that one problem in our lives, in that we feel that no one can deal with, and when we bring that one problem to God, the restoration actually begins from there. And in our passage today, a leper meets Jesus, and he brings his problem of leprosy in desperation and with the boldness. What is leprosy? Do you know anything about the leprosy? I just want to mention the leprosy here in the Bible is not the leprosy in modern days. It is this different like thing. The scholars like examine like how it is written, and it's not the leprosy that we know these days. But one thing we know that is that it is contagious skin disease. And having leprosy was not mere sickness that needs to be healed, but it was social sentence that defines his identity in the society. And it was religious statement that proclaims that he was unclean, which means that he was not allowed to come to God, the place of worship. And in the Old Testament, the whole chapter of Leviticus 13 and 14 actually talks about this leprosy. It's 116 verses. And I just want to share two verses from Leviticus. It's chapter 13, verse 45, 46. It says something like this. The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. And he shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. As this is from the Leviticus chapter 13, 45 and 46. So the leprosy, this disease, robbed him of his health. But more than that, this disease, the sentence imposed on him because of disease, robbed him of his name, his occupation, his family, and fellowship, his opportunity to worship God. Like it robbed him of his whole identity, actually, and left him only one label. What is that? Being a leper. So whenever people see him, oh, there's a leper. Whenever people, like him coming to them, oh, there's a leper, and turning away. So his whole identity was robbed, and then only one label left, a leper. And he was spiritually cut off. And he was not allowed to join the worship, and he was not allowed to live with other people. Like, doesn't it sound similar in some way, like during the COVID-19 season? But here in the book of Mark, like we see how his story of restoration begins with coming to Jesus, like crossing both the religious and social boundaries that he was told not to cross. Like in verse 5, a leper came to Jesus, imploring him, basically, which means he's begging him and kneeling before him. This leper was not supposed to be among the people. Like he was actually supposed to shout out, like whenever he goes, unclean, unclean, so that people can avoid him. But he comes to Jesus within touching distance, and he actually risks condemnation by approaching Jesus. And he risks everything he has, because he's breaking the taboo of the social custom, and also he's breaking the Levitical law that he was supposed to keep. You know, what this leper did was against both like social and religious norm of his time. But I think we can also relate to this idea because we are taught, everyone here, we are taught not to cross the boundaries. Like every culture has different boundaries and social norm, but whatever they are, we're taught not to cross that line. Like even in the postmodern culture, like that claim, many people says in postmodern culture is all about, you can do whatever you want to do. Like you can just be who you are, and still there are certain like lines or taboo that you're taught not to cross. Like for example, you should not criticize those who want to do what they want to do. Like you're taught not to cross those lines. And also in the world, like we're taught to hide our weakness and promote our strength. We're told that there is no benefit to reveal your flaws. For example, in job interview, like when you are asked, I think this is one of the questions always you're asked. When you're asked, like, what is your greatest weakness? Like, what is your answer? Like, you rarely reveal the full truth there. Like, often we spin a strength to weakness. Like, I'm far too perfectionistic. Sorry, that's my weakness. Or I am far too committed to work, so I'm less committed to family. That's my weakness. Like, or sometimes we come up with like hasty explanation on how we conquer that weakness. Oh, I used to be really lazy, but now I'm not. That's how we present ourselves, and that's how we are taught. I mean, that's not necessarily bad, especially when you do a job interview. But we don't want to be revealed as flawed individuals. And that's just our heart. Like, and even, isn't it true even in the church? Like, we always have the desires to present ourselves as spiritually okay. Like, we don't want to reveal what we are struggling with. So someone asks, like, how are you doing? I say, I'm doing okay. Because we don't want to reveal ourselves as like flawed individuals. That's what's in our heart usually. But but the message of the gospel is quite opposite. Like, it tells you to come to Jesus honestly, openly, and vulnerably. Because this is how the true restoration begins. Gospel tells you to come as you are, vulnerably. Like, in some way, it may sound similar to the message that we hear in the world these days. Like, because, we hear the messages like it's okay. Like, you don't have to pretend. Or you can be who you are. I mean, this is actually quite a famous message of our times, but the reasoning behind it is quite different. Like, in other words, the faith underneath this statement is different when we say, come as you are. When gospel says, come as you are, like, it always comes with like why we should and why we can come like that. Like, it tells you to come as you are, even when we're in sin. Even when we are with our flaws, in hope and faith that God can deal with it. So that is the faith underneath it. Like, gospel tells you to come as you are because of the faith that God can deal with it. And see how a leper asked Jesus, continuing verse 40. He comes in desperation and says to Jesus, if you will, you can make me clean. Do you see his faith? Like, he has faith that Jesus is somehow able to make him clean while others could not do it. And he has faith that Jesus is not like any other religious leaders, priests of the time. The priests had authority to pronounce him as a clean, but what a leper asks is not mere pronouncement, but he asks Jesus make him clean. And he has faith that Jesus somehow will not be affected by his own uncleanness, like while he knows everyone else is affected by his leprosy. Because if you touch leper, it means that you become unclean spiritually, like religious in terms of purity, you become unclean. And also there is health concerns as well. Like, the reason that he could go to Jesus as he was with his leprosy was because of his faith in who Jesus is. Because he has faith that he will not be affected by his own uncleanness. And he has faith that he can actually do something about it. And likewise, like, we can go to God with our flaws and sin. And actually, not just we can go to God, actually we should go to God, even when we're in our sin or even with our flaws, because of the faith that he is willing and he is able to deal with the darkest part of our lives. And then true restoration begins from here when we go to God vulnerably as who I am, who we are. And when the leper goes to Jesus, bringing his own uncleanness, saying to Jesus in verse 40 again, like, if you will, you can make me clean. How does Jesus respond? In verse 41, it says that Jesus is moved with pity, and he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will, and be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Like, Jesus didn't turn away from him, but rather he turned to him, like, with full of love and full of power. I think we have to understand the meaning of Jesus touching him, Jesus having physical contact with him, this leper, in this sin. Like, because it shows that true restoration comes with love and power. True restoration begins with vulnerability, but it comes with love and power when we go to him. So Jesus makes physical contact with this leper. I think this is very controversial and very radical move. Because he didn't have to do in order to accomplish what he was going to do. Like, he didn't actually have to touch him to heal him. There are many other incidents in the book of Mark and in the Gospels that he just makes people clean or heal just with the word. But here, he stretches out his hand and touches the leper. And from the leper's point of view, I think it is unheard act of compassion. It is unheard act of love. Like, no one touches him. Because there is legitimate concern, like health concern, and there is cultural taboo involved, and there is an issue of, like, spiritual purity that is held by Levitical law. So no one touches him. Yes, a leper has some sort of faith that Jesus is able to make him clean if he wants to, but him being touched by Jesus wasn't what he expected at all. Not at all. Like, he didn't expect that Jesus will touch him. And this was mind-blowing act of love and compassion. And then just imagine how he would felt. Like, even for me, like, having no physical contact for such a long time, when you actually, like, hug someone, you feel really loved. And when you actually have no, like, meeting people for a long time, and then you actually meet someone in person, there's something special there. And for a leper, like, he didn't get touched by anyone for a long time because of his disease. And when he actually, when Jesus touched him, made a physical contact, stretched out his arm. This is a act of love that he can receive. And not only it shows the love, this physical contact actually demonstrates the power and authority that Jesus had. By coming into contact with the leper, Jesus was supposed to become unclean as well, according to the law. But we don't read any notion of it or any concern of it. We only see the miraculous power working in this moment. And actually, what's happening is quite opposite. Like, it is not the uncleanness of a leper that made Jesus unclean. Rather, the very power of Jesus heals the leper and makes him clean. Like, more than any time, I think we all became an expert how the contamination works in this world with the virus. Do you know how it spreads? Like, one person gets infected and meet someone with no virus, the virus spreads again, and this person meets again, it spreads again. So it's like domino. There's like chains of infection. And the opposite never happens in this world. Like, You never hear about an infected person getting cured just because he met or he had contact with someone with no virus. It never worked like that because virus always spread. But meeting uninfected person doesn't mean that you get cured. No. And this is the story of the Bible, actually. Like from the beginning, ever since the first man rebelled against God, sin, curse, brokenness, evil, violation just spread and spread. It only becomes worse. There was no opposite until Jesus came in. This story of the Bible tells us that it always, like sin and curse and violation, evil, started from that first man rebelled against God. It spread and it becomes worse. But when Jesus came, He is the one who came with the power. And He reversed the chain of sins and evil. And He cleanses those who are unclean. And He forgives those who are in sin. And He turns heart of evils to good. And He embraces sinners with loving power. That is the story of redemption. That is the story of the gospel. And that is the story of the Bible. And this is why the message of the gospel tells you to come to God as you are, even with the most darkest and dreadful part of your lives. Because He loves you enough to embrace it. And because He is powerful enough to cleanse it and transform you. Like, not because these are okay as they are, but because God is willing and able to deal with it, with His love and with His power. And this is why the true restoration comes with His love and His power. So when you get hurt by someone else's sin, someone else's problem, or sometimes there are times you get hurt, but also there are times you hurt others because of your own problem. All the time. And we always see this when our problem and our issue hinders us from the relationship with one another, the intimate relationship with one another. And we always see that our problems hinders us from the intimate relationship with our God. And so even with the most darkest part of our lives, most stressful thing in us, we can come to God because He is powerful enough and because He is loving us. And this true restoration always prompts the mission. I think this is the key difference of spiritual restoration from just social correction or just education. Because it always prompts the mission. Like, we can never separate the true restoration and God's mission. And the commission, like God sending you, always follows the true restoration. I want to go back to our passage, verse 43. After Jesus responds to him and then He cleanses him, and the leprosy immediately left this person. And verse 43, I'll be reading for you again. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, for a proof to them." But he went out and began to talk freely about it. and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter. So Jesus gives two instructions here. One, do not, and one, do. And then I think these are full of intention. I think these are not random instruction from Jesus. First, so he commands not to speak freely about it. Basically, he tells him, okay, not tell anyone about this. And then the other one is go and show yourself to priest. What he commands is actually the completion of restoration. This is what I mean, because the key problem of leprosy, like I mentioned earlier, was not mere sickness, but the separation. Because this leprosy made him away, like isolated, cut off from the community, from the people. Like he was alienated socially and spiritually. And the way he can be restored in completion back to his community was actually going back to priests and get examined. And priest will pronounce him, see, and then him, and priest will pronounce him as clean. And then he is able to go back to community, and he is able to go back to the place of worship, like temple. He can join the temple worship. So when Jesus tells him to go and show yourself to priests, Jesus tells him to get complete restoration back to the community and back to the worship. But not only that, he is sending him to mission. In the Gospel of Mark, the priests and all other religious leaders are often and usually portrayed as someone against Jesus. They're not accepting him. And in verse 45, Jesus is sending this leper cleansed to the priest. And it says, as proof of himself. Proof of who Jesus is. Proof that he has authority and power even above the law. So Jesus is actually sending him as a missionary to be a proof of who Jesus is. And even the commandment not to say anything to anyone was for the greater mission that Jesus was taking on. If you read previous chapter and the next chapter of this passage, Jesus is already too famous. Like, there are people coming to him always. His crowd is always there. And Jesus couldn't do the ministry that he was supposed to do, or he was planning to do, which was preaching ministry. He was, in this section of the story, Jesus was preaching, going through the Galilee, and he's going to the towns, and he was preaching. And because of the crowds, like who were seeking for the healing from Jesus, he couldn't continue his ministry, and he intentionally concealed his identity because he knew that it will hinder the ministry that he was doing, the mission that he was doing. But also because he knew that him being revealed, Jesus being revealed as someone who is loving and who has power, he knew that it will lead the climax of his ministry. And his time had not yet come. What was the climax of his ministry? The cleansing of leper was not just this one man's restoration, but it was a sound of trumpet, proclaiming that something is happening. Something new is happening. And Jesus was not just looking into a leper, but he is also looking into the cross, the climax of his ministry, the death that he will go to take, even from this point at this point. That's why Jesus is telling him not to tell anyone about me yet, because this is not yet the time for me to go to cross and to accomplish the mission that I came to the world. Jesus being on the cross, his death, his resurrection, this is how he eternally reversed the chain of sin and death. He did it. He reversed this chain of sin and death by taking on the consequence of sin of the world. You know, as we read from the passage today, it was clear. It was clear that Jesus is that one person who is not being affected by leprosy. Among everyone else, he is the only one person who is not being affected the sin of this world. He's the only one person who is not being affected the uncleanness and flaws and violation and evils of this world. But yet, he took all the consequences of sin and evil unto himself on the cross. And even for us, he paid our sin. He paid the cost so that we can have true restoration when he comes to him vulnerably. And that's why we can expect the power and his love that works in our lives. And we can expect the true restoration that will restore us. So today, I just want us to remember that true restoration. Come as you are. Even with the darkest sin, even with the most dreadful flaws, come as you are, and he will touch you and he will cleanse you. Let's spend some time to respond to the word.